Church, let's talk a little bit about going into the fourth chapter of the first letter to the Thessalonian church. So far, chapters 1 through 3 have been pretty amazing, as we got a little bit of background and understanding of how this letter came to be in Paul's missionary journey with Silas, and the fact that and Timothy, I can't forget Tim, and the fact, that on that missionary journey they had gone to that church and just fell in love with those people and began to understand kind of the level of faith that they had, which is pretty amazing. And now he separated from them because of the whole angry mob thing that we read about in the 17th chapter of Acts. However, Paul is just so yearning to see these folks, but he knows it's not safe to go back, sends Timothy back, and Timothy writes back and says, hey man, you can't even, you have to see this, Paul. You got to understand the level of faith and the dedication that these people have. They are killing it. They are killing it with their faith in Christ. And so we kind of see that correspondence back where their faith is encouraging of all people. The writer of the New Testament, Paul, not just encouraging, but they're inspiring him. They're that kind of group of people, which is so amazing, because I love being part of Grafted Church, because you guys are such an inspiring group of people. When you're open and you're honest and we're real together, it becomes this light of the world. And we talked about last week too that how sometimes, it's our faith. It's not our circumstance or our situation. It's not anything that we're doing. It's not even that things are going really well for us, but it's the fact of our hope and our faith in Christ that becomes such an encouragement to the people around us. I think a good example is, like I say, I've mentioned this before in the previous weeks, when our bishop comes to visit. He's the bishop and he oversees, 60 some odd churches. But he always, when he comes to us, he always leaves and he's so encouraged and lifted up, and he adores us and loves us. So we have this great real life example of that, of just that power of our faith, because what we believe on the inside begins to pour out on the outside and becomes reflective in our lives as we change, as we grow. It's just amazing. So we're getting into the fourth chapter now. So that spins us up to speed, really kind of 1 through 3. But we get into the fourth chapter, and Paul issues, number one, this really, I guess you would call it a hard challenge. And the reason I say hard is not because it's difficult in that regard, but what he does is he challenges the Thessalonian church to a life of sexual purity and righteousness, and even uses the word in the Greek, holiness, to a life of holiness. And it's funny because it seems like it's a dramatic change or shift in gears to the theme of the rest of the letter. But church, really, it's not. It's really not. Here's a deal. I'll just give you this. Some years ago, I trained for a year to do a strongman competition, and I was training and working with trainers and with other strongmen and champions and some scrubs and just some bros in the gym. But it's amazing because once you come into this culture and this environment of people doing the same thing, kind of moving toward the same goal, and they see you and they see your potential in you, what they do is they begin to point out, they're like, hey man, you do this really great. I had this lift that was really awesome. I could put up this amount of weight that was really spectacular. However, when somebody saw the thing that said, you do so good in this, but I think this here is the one thing that could put you down. This is the one thing that could compromise all of your training, that could make you go from being a hero to being a zero. And I remember for me at the time, it was doing the Atlas stones, and a strongman winner, he had come to me and said, man, he goes, dude, if you don't learn to get to squat correctly, you're never going to be able to lift the stones. He goes, it'll be embarrassing in the competition. And I was like, oh gosh, man. But it was such a good challenge because I took that on as a challenge in training. And Paul is doing the same thing here. He's looking at the Thessalonican culture, and he's looking at that whole Macedonian kind of mantra of how they roll as a culture and society. And he goes, man, the sexual perverseness and the sexual sin is so prevalent here. He goes, I think this might be the thing that that could really cripple the progress that you've made. That could really be that just kind of that poke that knocks and tumbles the whole thing down. And that shouldn't be any big surprise to us. We consider the culture we live in now, where everything sexual is definitely perverted. It's definitely twisted. It's definitely used to sell products and used to exploit people and to grow business. It's kind of very, and it's not good, promoting good, healthy sexuality. Our society is all about perverting and twisting and having very unhealthy and messed up sexuality, and that we get caught up into that. And that's what Paul was trying to tell the Thessalonian church. He's like, hey, if you guys get caught up in this, bleh, it could be the thing that unravels everything that you're doing. So he issues this as a challenge. Now, I love the way the wording is, because I think it's even in the first or second verse. He goes, you maintaining your sexual purity, and he goes, and in Christ Jesus. So he's even giving us some encouragement in the fact, like, you don't have to try and just figure it out. Just go back to what Jesus was teaching about sexuality, about marriage, and about sexual sin, and adhere to that teaching. And we find that when we do that, all of a sudden we will just become pleasing to God, not based off of what we do, but based off of what we believe when we really look and examine that. So that's what Paul's encouraging us here. And I think it's a great encouragement for us to really examine that. But even if it's not sexual sin or sexual purity, just to look and really be honest and examine the things that we know that, hey, could compromise all this great faith that we have, that is encouraging the believers around us. And here's the thing is that Hebrews even tells us that we don't serve a high priest or a king who's unsympathetic to everything we're going through. I can guarantee you, if you're dealing with it, Jesus has dealt with it and has overcome it and has some words of wisdom in it, and some really good guys chose to wrote that down in this book we call the Bible. So there is a wealth of information and knowledge for us to go to. But that's the first thing, and Paul kind of makes that transition into, again, encouraging us not just in that, but into moving into a lifestyle of holiness. And I want to explore that, you guys. I want to open that up. I want to really discuss that and grind that out with you this week. So I wanted to leave that with you, and because I'm really encouraged by this. We're in the 4th chapter. Last week was really awesome. Next week we're going to go through the 5th chapter and kind of start wrapping this thing up, and I'm excited, super excited to hear from what your hearts have to say, man. Gosh, I love you guys.